This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
Conference Preview Week continues on the high school football roundup. Today's episode, we're talking about the best small school conference in the state, at least in my completely biased opinion, the Six Rivers Conference. I'm joined by Steve Prestegard and Gary Craugh to talk all things Six Rivers. And last year, the Six Rivers was as competitive as ever. Potosi-Cassville winning the conference title again outright, but Blackhawk Warren got past them in Level 3 and ultimately finished state runner-up in Division 7 to Edgar. River Ridge made the postseason last year, won in Level 1 against Highland before falling to Potosi-Cassville in Level 2, and Peck Argyle looking to improve after last year's one-win season. But the conference looks drastically different this year than it has in years past. Southwestern East Dubuque and Benton Scales Mount Charlesburg are heading over to the SWAL, and coming into the conference are Boscobel, Seneca Wazeeka Steuben, Iowa Grant, and Riverdale, coming over from what was the last 11-player Rigid Valley Conference season. So, Steve, before we jump into the recap of last year's 2023 campaign, you have identified yourself as the Nine Rivers Truther on this call. I am going to give you the floor and give you the opportunity to filibuster and fill us in on why you are a Nine Rivers Truther. Please educate us.
The fact is that, there's a missed marketing opportunity here because the Six Rivers, and I looked this up, but I don't have it right in front of me right now. The Six Rivers being the Mississippi, the Grant, the Platte, the Fever River, which becomes the Galena River down below the state line, the Pecatonica River, and the Apple River. That's those Six Rivers. But when you have the teams now from what's left of the old Ridge and Valley Conference, you have to really add the Wisconsin River and the Kickapoo River and the Pine River. So it really should be the Nine Rivers Conference. Therefore, that's what I'm going to call it the rest of the season, just to let everybody know that.
So just turn the six upside down, and then we have the appropriate conference name. There.
Get the T-shirt makers ready for
that. Yes. Start printing the T-shirts. All right. Now back to the football part of this conversation. So, Steve, when we did this preview episode last year, it's kind of funny when we look back on it because I think Blackhawk Warren wasn't really a team that we had our eye on because, they graduated 3 1,000-yard rushers from the season before. But, boy, did they make us eat those words. And this year they have Eli Schleim and Owen Sefrud back in the mix with some awesome new uniforms, by the way. I don't know if you saw those on their Facebook page, but those new uniforms look really, really sharp. And they have a ton of starters coming back along that offensive line. And I don't think any of us will make that same mistake twice because they come in as the number 2 ranked team in Division 7 to begin the 2024 season. And there's a lot of optimism with this Blackhawk Warren team in the 2024 season.
Well, for one thing, the program, Corey Mills retired. Desi Braden came in. Of course, he was part of the program already, so that wasn't like bringing up somebody from beyond, from outside. But they have to be a solid program any place from year to year to year. They are, for one thing, they play an offense that's difficult to defend against, and they've just, their institutional culture and all of that is for a Division 7 school, which doesn't have a lot of players, but they just plug guys in, and they have as much experience back from a team that finished second in the state last year. They've certainly earned the number 2 seed or the number 2 rank coming into this year.
Yeah, a bunch of those players are two-way players for Blackhawk Warren, like you said, and they are productive on both sides of the ball. So, we'll see if they can stay healthy and continue to build on the success that last year's team had. But right behind them in the Division 7 rankings is Potosi-Cassville, the number 3 ranked team in Division 7 to begin the season. And that's even after losing both Roman Frederick and Eli Adams, 2 all-state rushers for this Potosi-Cassville team. And they have numbers coming into the season, according to Coach Siegert, 50 players coming out for football between the two schools. And, something else to keep in mind, Gary, River Ridge also in the mix, the number 6 ranked team to begin the season in Division 7. So 3 of the top 6 teams in the state in Division 7 are in the Six Rivers Conference, and you anticipate that these 3 teams are going to be going back and forth. They're going to be running into each other at least once, if not twice, during this year. A lot of respect given for the 3 teams at the top of the Six Rivers, and deservedly so, Gary.
Well, it's going to be a great year for the Six Rivers. I mean, Potosi-Cassville, they've got history with Black Hawk Warren. They've got history with River Ridge. And Potosi-Cassville always seems like they're at least in that top 2, maybe top 3 conversation every year for the conference. Potosi-Cassville, their biggest challenge this year, I think, is going to be starting quarterback, because while they lost Braden Fishnick, to graduation from last year. So when you lose your starting quarterback and almost a 900-yard rusher in the same breath, that's a big hole to fill. River Ridge, they're not a big school, but they always seem to put, a bunch of those farm kids on the line. They've always got, a pretty competitive team every year in and year out.
Yeah, what's interesting about Potosi-Cassville also is, remember, and I think it was the game that Mark Evenstad and I did there, the Blackhawk homecoming game, where Potosi-Cassville, if I'm not mistaken, they had not had their top 2 rushers, or one of them, because of injury. Well, they handed the ball off to Eli Adams. That worked out okay, but also Braden Fishnick really stood out. He had not done a whole lot before that, had to and did. So and that's kind of the credo, I think, of Potosi-Cassville, that they, they plug guys in and they kind of tell them, you got to perform, and they do. That's the thing. And the other thing, of course, is to have 50 players in Division 7 is not. There will be Division 6, maybe Division 5 teams that don't have 50 players on their roster. And look, and Potosi-Cassville's got 50 in Division 7. Go figure that.
Well, another point I just happened to notice too is, besides losing their starting quarterback and number 2 rusher, they also lose their top running back, Eli Adams, and they lose their 3rd leading rusher, Roman Frederick. So you're going to have pretty much a whole new starting backfield back there for Coach Siegert, and getting comfortable with each other and the continuity. It's going to be a big thing.
It could be one of those things. We've seen years like this where Potosi-Cassville kind of stumbled early, the first few games, and then all of a sudden, about halfway through the season, everybody kind of got it at the same time, and they make this big rush into the postseason. If they're ranked 3rd, obviously not a lot of people think that's going to happen again, but it wouldn't be a shock, I suppose, with that kind of inexperience coming back. But on the other hand, it's, well, if you guys don't work, we'll just bring these guys in. You have 50 guys on the team. And again, as we said before, if their offensive line is veteran coming back, that makes up for a lot of inexperience right there.
Well, on that same note, they did lose 3 starting linemen. So whether they were starters or not, I don't know. But it's still, you lose 3 linemen, and from a school that size, well, Potosi and Cassville, could be holes to fill there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is, the 3 teams at the top that we're talking about in the Six Rivers, they all rely on the running game, but they all do it in different ways. It's so fascinating that there's, different strategies and different ways to, get the ball to your playmakers and, put them in position to be successful. And again, sort of a hot take, type of thing. I don't think all three teams make it out of the conference undefeated. I think that, someone's going to beat someone else. I don't think any one person or any one team is going to win the conference, outright with an undefeated record. I think that, one team's going to get the best of each other. I think just the way that those teams play and how they match up stylistically, I don't think that there's any one true runaway favorite to win the Six Rivers this year. Stephen, Gary, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you talked about different styles of offense. One of the keys is, I think, the fact that they have been running their systems for a long, long time. In fact, I remember Corey Mills talking to me about their decision to go to the Veer after they'd had a year where they missed the playoffs in the 1990s, and they have run it ever since. They obviously do a few different things depending on what kind of players they have, but they have run it for a long time and been very successful. Potosi has run what are basically wing T plays, but they're out of multiple formations. So they're more formation-wise than your typical wing T team. A few years ago, they won the conference running a lot of four wide, for instance. And then River Ridge, of course, runs the Hoke bone, which was John Hoke's version of the option when he was the coach in Lancaster, similar to what Travis Winkers runs in Darlington, and again, very successful. If you look at the other programs, there's been a lot of, we're going to do this different this year, and it doesn't necessarily work from year to year, and then they change it again, and it still doesn't work. And that continuity on offense is really, I think, a big reason why those programs are as successful as they've been consistently.
And River Ridge, in contrast to Potosi, speaking of continuity, they'll have the continuity in their offensive backfield as opposed to Potosi. They've got their starting quarterback back. They've got their starting running back back, and they've also got one of their top wide receivers back. So they're going to have an advantage, I think, right off the bat there. But like you said earlier, I mean, with a school with a turnout of 50 athletes, it's hard to say what Potosi is going to come up with. But River Ridge, I think, would have to be, taken pretty seriously right off the bat with that combination of starters back. Yeah,
well, I guarantee you, no one in Potosi Castle is not going to take River Ridge seriously. That's that is a.
Oh yeah.
That I can't even tell you where that rivalry started. Put it this way, it dates back older than River Ridge because they go back to the old Bloomington West Grant, years way back when.
And that was back when Potosi was on their own and Cassville was on their own as well. But
that's right. Yeah.
Potosi and Bloomington at the time. Yeah, that goes back to my time.
Blackhawk Conference, yes.
Yeah, and I've had a front row seat for a lot of those Potosi Cassville River Ridge mashups over the last couple of years. And, when you look at the box score, sometimes, you'll see that it's a, two-score, victory for Potosi Cassville, but it kind of came down to the last possession. You see a pick six or a scoop and score or something like that. These games are hyper competitive, and there's no love lost between the Potosi Cassville program with River Ridge, and the rivalry between Potosi Castle and Blackhawk Warren, also very competitive. I mean, Potosi Cassville handing Blackhawk Warren their only regular season loss, during the season, and then the counter to that in the level 3 playoff where Blackhawk Warren comes to Potosi and shuts out Potosi Cassville on their home field. It's such a wild thing, and I'm very curious to see how those three teams go at it. But there are other teams in the Six Rivers Conference that we need to talk about because there's new teams here, and it's a very interesting dynamic now with the newbies that are coming into the conference from the what was the Ridge and Valley 11-player conference. The Ridge and Valley now just an 8-player conference going forward. So the teams that come into the Six Rivers, we have Seneca, Wazeeka, Steuben, Iowa Grants, Riverdale, and Boscobel. Seneca, Wazeeka, Steuben lost their first 3 games last year, then won 4 in a row to make the postseason, ultimately losing to Blackhawk Warren in the level 1 playoff. Iowa Grant missed the playoffs with a 3-6 record, but they have a new head coach, Hayden Link, who was an assistant at UW Platteville the last 3 years, is now at the helm of the Iowa Grant Panthers football team. Riverdale was 1-8 last year. Their only win came against Boscobel. And speaking of the Bulldogs, they didn't win a game last year, but they had some very competitive games, including that wild Week 3 game that Tom Nices and I got to call against Iowa Grant. And Boscobel, oh, by the way, they returned 8 starters on that offense. So there's some optimism, I would think, that Boscobel can have some success. When you look at the teams that are coming in, Steve, anything that kind of stands out to you? Any of these teams you think can potentially make some noise in the Six Rivers?
Well, before that, I'd like to back up and talk for just a minute about the 2023 Ridge and Valley season, which was probably the most bizarre football season I've ever seen a conference have. It started off with everybody lost their 2 non-conference games. But then once the conference season started, every week there was at least one game, and sometimes there were more than that, where you're looking up the scores late Friday night or Saturday morning, and you're just staring at the screen. Is that right? Do they mess up the report? How is that possible? And I remember we got to the Highland game against, I think it was Hillsboro, which turned out to be for the conference title, and we were like, I don't know what's going to happen, because to this point, nothing was predictable in the Ridge and Valley. And it was just, and I think the phrase we came up with last year was 7 weeks of homecoming games. And that's kind of how and the ironic part was that Highland actually finally won the conference title in homecoming, beating Hillsboro. But that was just a weird season and a very strange way for the Ridge and Valley to go out last year.
Nothing made sense in that conference last year.
Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing at all. Yep. So having closed the coffin on the Ridge and Valley, I think the team that's from the Ridge and Valley that's poised to do the best in this conference is obviously Wazeeka, Steuben, Seneca, because they have the best program year to year in the Ridge and Valley. However, I will tell you that those 4 teams out of the Ridge and Valley really have to step it up, because, they're going into a conference that hits everybody week to week, and a conference that usually does pretty well in non-conference games and usually gets teams relatively deep in the postseason, which we obviously saw last year. And yeah, Boscobel didn't win the game, obviously did make some progress, have a lot of starters back. But they and Iowa Grant and Riverdale and Wazeeka Steuben, they have to get a lot better if they're going to compete in the Six Rivers.
Big thing Wazeeka Steuben's going to have to overcome. They didn't graduate that many kids, but they lost 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. So as compared to Potosi losing your starting backfield, when you start losing your offensive line, that number 4 out of 5. That's a hurdle to overcome to try and get these kids to play together. There's a lot of intricacies that go into it. So Wazeeka Steuben's going to have to come over that. Iowa Grant, new coach coming in from UW Platteville. There should be some excitement for the kids. Hey, we've got a Division III coach coaching us now. So I kind of look for them to take a step up. Peck Argyle, they lost 13 kids to graduation. And I don't know. I see that as they lost a lot of the starters. I see that as kind of a hard pill to swallow for those guys. Boscobel.
And from a team that wasn't very successful last year, too.
Yeah. Right. And Boscobel, you can only do nothing but root for those guys because, they've had so many years of trying. It's kind of like Dodgeville. They've had so many years of trying to build. And, maybe this year is the year.
Well, they do have a lot of guys back, and yeah. I think the thing that appeared to be impressive, I did not see Boscobel play last year, but the thing that seems like it was impressive is that it looked like that they had buy-in from everybody over the whole season. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, I have covered teams that didn't win a game, and that's really hard. Kids want to win, and when you first off, going to games where you really don't have much of a shot. And then you have games like the Iowa Grant game where, yeah, you played well, but not quite well enough. And, it's hard to keep everybody from being discouraged, but it really does look like they managed to do that. They got a lot of guys coming back, and they got their coaching staff coming back, which I think, similar to these teams that have had just turnover, new coach after new coach after new coach, and then they wonder why they're not successful because they have zero continuity.
Yeah.
Maybe basketball is going in the right direction, but again, the simple fact of who they have to play in this conference now, and honestly, they ought to know that because basketball and Iowa Grant, at least I believe, were briefly in the Six Rivers in that stretch of 5 seasons with 5 different conferences I think we had. So they should know that, but to understand that and to be able to play better is not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah. And you have to kind of take into account possibly Riverdale having another tough year. They've only got 3 starters coming back on offense, 3 starters coming back on defense. They're a small school. I mean, they just don't have a lot of numbers, but they've got the coaches almost got to kind of hope for some miracles to come along the way to win a couple, 3 games out of that mess this year.
Well, the big thing is, when you have, these small schools and how physical that this conference is, staying healthy is a big thing, because if you lose one player, you essentially lose 2 if they're playing on both sides of the ball. And that's something that none of these, teams can really afford, regardless of who you are in the conference. So it'll be very interesting to see how this new look Six Rivers conference plays out. But again, very top heavy with the the big 3 heavy hitters at the top, but some new teams in the conference coming in from the old Ridge and Valley Conference. With that in mind, let's talk about the teams that you have your eye on in the Six Rivers. Obviously, we know about the top teams, but the one that I do have my eye on, Gary, you kind of alluded to this, was Seneca Wazeeka Steuben. They're kind of that interesting wild card where maybe the right team on the right night might be able to, give some trouble to some of the teams at the top of the conference. I covered the River Ridge against Seneca Wazeeka Steuben game last year. It was not a pretty football game. Football's a beautiful game. It's just not always pretty. and that certainly fit the bill in their matchup against between the 2 in week 2. That is a program, like you said, that is pretty, the most consistent of the new ones that are coming into the conference. And, like I said, the right team on the right night, they might be a team that has a say, not necessarily to win, but have a say in how the conference shakes out.
I think, depending on how well the offensive line gels together, in the weeks leading up to the first game and those first couple of games, could determine, the outcome of that conference. They've got some decent players coming back, and I think it's going to boil down to that offensive line. Steve?
Well, Wazeeka Steuben Seneca has, and this has been going on for a few years now. We see how good their basketball program has been. They've got, I'm not quite sure where this started, but they've got great athletes at that school for a school of that size. But again, the horses on the line are probably going to determine whether or not those guys are going to be able to do something as far as challenging the big 3, basically, in the Six Rivers this year.
I don't see them challenge the big 3. I mean, I see them be in the top half of the second pack, but it's going to take a lot to take on Blackhawk, Potosi, Cassville, and River Ridge. I just think those have way too many horses in the corral.
Certainly this year, yeah.
Yep, I agree with you there. And then the players to watch in the conference, the one that I'm looking at is the quarterback of River Ridge, Brandon Davis. He had a really great season last year for River Ridge. He actually beat out Matthew Nice for the quarterback spot after week 1 of the season against Highland. If you remember last year when River Ridge played Highland, River Ridge needed the game-winning touchdown with 20 seconds left to go in the game, and then Coach Wade Winkers decided to make the decision and put Brandon Davis in at the quarterback position. And as a sophomore last year, led the team in passing and rushing, a first-team all-conference player, also a very good linebacker for the Timberwolves. And if the Timberwolves are going to be successful, he's going to be the guy and the catalyst to make it happen for the Timberwolves. And I think that he's an early candidate for potentially Player of the Year in the Six Rivers. Steve, your players to watch in the Six Rivers this year?
I think the guy I'm interested in watching is Eli Schlemm from Blackhawk Warren. Blackhawk Warren's been pretty successful with guys who are just, we have to put a new quarterback in. Well, okay, he works out fine. To have a quarterback coming back, however, and obviously Davis is another example of that, but they might actually have a little bit better offense than they did last year because Schlemm isn't going to be the new guy anymore under center. Obviously, that's never going to be a team that puts it up in the air a lot. But I do remember several years ago, it was the first year of the run that Blackhawk had going to state, where they're playing in the level 4 game in Middleton, and they were playing Hilbert Stockbridge. And the quarterback, Michael Flanagan, that's who it was. Everybody, they're going to run. They're going to run like 90 times in this game or whatever. Well, the first play, they ran a play-action pass, and Flanagan threw it deep to Jet Rufinock, one of the all-name team players, a wingback in major trouble because here's a team that can run for 350 yards a game, and you just gave up an 80-something yard touchdown pass to start the game, and that is how it ended up. It ended up, they won the game, went to state. So I because of that, I think that offense just runs better with as any offense does with an experienced quarterback, and having Schlemm back on a team that's really good anyway, I think is going to be a real plus for the Warriors.
Well, I'm going to go a little bit different route. Top guy I want to watch this year is Isaiah Groom from Potosi Cassville. Offensive and defensive player of the year last year in the Six Rivers. A lot of the offense, in my opinion, starts in the offensive line. You've got a guy that's, offensive player of the year, make some holes open up. Defensive player of the year at a linebacker spot. That's the quarterback of the defense in my book. So if he can come back and do as good as he did last year, I think it'd be a really big win for the Potosi Cassville team. The other guy I'd like to watch this year too is Owen Sefrud from Blackhawk.
Yeah.
Lane Marty graduates out. He was a almost 1,500 yard rusher. Sefrud picks up almost 1,500 yards. So he's going to be the main man, and with Schlemm back, those were the top 3 running backs last year, Marty, Sefrud, and Schlemm. So a lot of it's going to fall back on Owen Sefrud and see if he can pick up where he left off last year to help that Blackhawk offense.
The only thing that's different about Blackhawk Warren this year, as far as that goes, is that one of those running backs isn't named Mills, because for years and years and years and years, their stud running back, his last name was Mills. So that's the only thing that's different. But again, it partly because of the system that they run, I think, and just because of their tradition, just plug a guy in and he performs. But in this case, to have both of those guys back, Schlemm behind center and then Sefrud, they're going to be a major headache for everybody that they play.
Yeah, agreed.
I am a big Owen Sefrud fan, not just because of him being a running back, but as you know, Gary, a state champion wrestler as well. He is a very well put together athlete, and he is not afraid. He's kind of a honey badger out there. Even on the defensive side of the ball, he is just everywhere and flies to the football. Love the way that he plays. Another player to have our eye on. So looking forward to seeing how the Six Rivers Conference shakes out. Again, I kind of made my prediction that there won't be anyone undefeated in the Six Rivers. I think the 3 teams all have wins against each other somehow. And I'm very curious to see that when the season's all said and done, how these teams are going to be seeded. Because if you can make it out of your bracket, my gosh, you have a pretty solid shot of winning state. But I mean, those teams are all bottlenecked, in this grouping. So yeah. Any final thoughts, Steve or Gary, on what you expect to see in the Six Rivers this year?
Well, I think it's entirely possible that, like last year, for one thing, I think you're right. It wouldn't shock me if there was a three-way tie for first atop the Six Rivers. And it also would not shock me to see what happened last year, which is that the regular season results do not necessarily correlate to the postseason results. Mm-hmm. I do absolutely believe that those three teams are going to face each other in some order in the postseason. And, again, similar to seasons that have taken place before, obviously. I don't know whose number 4 is going to be in that bracket of 8, but I really believe that going to Madison is going to go through those three teams in one sense or another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing, the saddest point to me is that the Six Rivers does not have a situation like the SWC. Platteville's going Division 4, Prairie Division 5, Lancaster Division 6. These guys are all in the same division. So it's like you said, there's only going to be one of these, if they get that far, that could possibly make it to state. And that's too bad for them, because they've got some quality teams up at the top half of that division.
It's like the old movie Highlander. In the end, there can be only one.
That's right.
And an interesting subplot to keep in mind, if you look at how the schedule is laid out for the conference, Black Hawk Warren and Potosi Cassville don't play each other until the final week of the season.
Wow.
So,
you think we're going to be doing that game?
I think we have that one penciled in as one that we'll be having on our Queen Bee Radio airwaves at some point during the season. And for what it's worth, Potosi Cassville and River Ridge do play each other on September 13th. So a week 4 matchup to kind of set the tone for how the conference is going to play out. So it should be a very fun, very intriguing season for the Six Rivers Conference in 2024. Thank you again to Steve and Gary for joining me to chat all things related to the Six Rivers Conference football season this coming year. And coming up tomorrow, we will talk 8-player football, covering the 2 local teams in our area, the Belmont Braves and the newly assigned 8-player football team, the Highland Cardinals. Those 2 teams very storied, and they get to renew their rivalry in football this coming year. Looking forward to seeing how that shakes out. Steve and I will have that conversation in tomorrow's episode of the High School Football Roundup as our conference preview week continues. For Steve and Gary, I'm Tyler Diktanas. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you for tomorrow's episode for 8-player football.